Hello and welcome. We are very pleased to have with us on this show Professor Irfan Habib, Professor Emeritus, History Department of the Aligarh Muslim University, whose seminal work on the medieval period of Indian history has drawn wide acclaim. Awarded the Padma Bhushan in 2007, Professor Habib needs little introduction, but his seminal work on the agrarian system in Mughal India has become a must of reading for both students and teachers. Professor Habib's extended work also includes explorations into cartography, which is looking at the reading of maps through historical periods, and the department's work, the Medieval Atlas of Indian History, and Professor Habib's own work on the Atlas of Ancient Indian History is an excellent cross-interdisciplinary work forcing students and teachers interrogating history as a scientific discipline. Professor Irfan Habib, it's a pleasure to have you with us on this show.
Thank you. It's kind
You
words.
famously and most recently said that the mythologizing of history seems to be a great preoccupation of the present dispensation. What exactly does the mythologizing of history mean?
Well, actually, there are two aspects of it. One is that, that aspect developed in early 20th century. That is to claim for ancient India, or in their words Hindu civilization, achievements that are unique and that should place that civilization above every other culture. This took early forms like claiming great antiquity for the Sanskrit language and particularly for the Vedas, and to claim all kinds of scientific achievements for a very early period, achievements that are not recorded or only occur in the epics, and so forth. So, they are heirs to that tradition, and because of their Hindutva doctrine, which goes back of course to their foundation, RSS, the foundation of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in 1920s. They have espoused that, and then the anti-Muslim tradition, that also has early beginnings, and of course, that had Muslim counterparts also. So, they have picked up all of those prejudices and prejudiced interpretations of medieval Indian history. For instance, the Hindu Mahasabha slogan that we have been under foreign rule since 1000 AD has been picked up by them, as if all Muslim rulers were foreigners and sent money abroad, wealth abroad. That is one aspect of mythologizing. The second is to which adequate attention I think is not paid, is their distortion of the history of the national movement. Although they were themselves founded 22 years before independence, they did nothing against the English. So, when their leaders say that the patriotism of the RSS cannot be questioned, I am quoting a recent statement, one wonders where was this patriotism from 1925 to 1947. They took no part in the national movement, they have no heroes, their leaders never went to jail except Hegdevar. By mistake he was arrested for a few days, I think, in the civil disobedience movement, but otherwise nothing happened. Golwalkar has hardly any harsh words for the British government, compared his harsh words against Muslims. So, their problem is that they can only revile the leaders of the national movements, and now what they are doing is to pick up certain people who did not, who in their view can be espoused as their heroes. Their main heroes today, it seems, are Bhagat Singh, Subhash Chandra Bose and Patel. None of the three had anything to do with RSS or Hindu Mahasabha. Obviously, they can't find any other heroes. The only thing they could say about these three people were that two were critical of Gandhiji, Bhagat Singh, Shahid Bhagat Singh and Subhash Chandra Bose, and Sardar Patel was critical of Jawaharlal Nehru's views. They had controversies for instance, in Nehru's Tomorrow in India against Patel. They don't realize, of course, and many people don't realize that in the national movement it was quite common to have these differences without impairing the unity against the British. In that unity, the RSS and Hindu Mahasabha had no place. So, now they are building up a mythology in which the so called Hindu nationalism, actually that is a misnomer, because they were never nationalists, they were communalists. So, in which the Hindu communalism is trying to be portrayed as the mainstream of the national movement. Muslims are being excluded from it. You will not find any Muslim name among the leaders of the national movement in the textbooks which the first NDA government produced, and I think the same thing would happen now.
Professor Habib, taking off from what you said about the national movement, why is it so important for Hindutva and the proponents of Hindutva, this regime, to revile Gandhi?
I mean, you would know much better than I do that in the 1990s they had started a campaign saying that Gandhiji should not be called Rashtrapita because the Indian nation is as old as Rig Veda. They forgot that there is no name for India in the Rig Veda. But this is so, and you go back and I remember when I was a student in my first year in the Aligarh Muslim University, then in December 1947 there was a report, I think in the Hindustan Times, which we used to get, that Golwalkar had come to Delhi and had delivered the most poisonous kind of speeches against against Gandhiji.
December 1947.
December 1947, practically calling for his death. And again the Hindu Mahasabha leaders also with whom they were allied were at that time reviling Gandhiji, even more than the Muslim League leaders, it seemed. So, Gandhiji stood for everything which RSS wants to be removed: tolerance, non-violence, goodwill towards all, real work among the poor people, bringing poor people into the national movement, everything that Gandhi stood for. They had not only to revile him, but also to revile those objectives that Gandhi stood for. We must remember that Golwalkar had praised the caste system,
yes,
and this was normal for Hindu Mahasabha leaders.
You said, I think connected to this, that the 4 weeks before Gandhi's assassination are very important to study.
Yes, I particularly remember that month in which the massacre stopped after his fast, and how the fast changed the whole atmosphere. It's, I think, one of the most dramatic moments in Indian history.
How old were you, Professor Habib, when partition happened?
When independence happened, I was 16 years. Practically exactly 16 years.
And how would you remember that whole period in India, in Aligarh?
Well, Aligarh, you know, was different from India in that Aligarh had been a center of Muslim League. It's, however, important to remember that whereas Muslim League had majority support, there was a strong nationalist element and also communist element in the university.
In the Aligarh Muslim University?
Aligarh Muslim University.
So, both a strong nationalist and a strong communist movement?
I would not say strong communist movement, a communist component.
Okay.
And I would not say strong nationalist movement, I would say significant nationalist support. And they were very firm in their views. When independence occurred, that came as a great surprise to the Aligarh University, because the Muslim League had assured that Aligarh would be a part of Pakistan.
Oh.
Of course, in writing it is not there. When I have looked up the Muslim League writing, they are saying that how can we have these parts like Rohilkhand especially, because if these parts are included in Pakistan, Pakistan would be a majority Hindu majority state. I mean, that was common sense, but common sense did not prevail at Aligarh. So when the Mountbatten Award came, it came as a great shock to the Muslim Leaguers. But then, of course, Pakistan began to offer posts and positions, and so a large number of people left. But the university continued to function, and on 15th of August, national flag was put up everywhere. And I think one of the best times for the university was when it welcomed the Sharnathis, and they all lived in the hostels. There were about a third of the whole student population.
Right.
Not a single incident occurred. So I remember those days, but anything could have happened in December 47 and January 48 if Gandhiji's fast had not occurred. It could have come in, although the government had sent, I think it was at Pandit Nehru's own instance, the Kamayu regiment to protect the university and the city. So it was well protected, but the kind of massacres that had happened in Punjab, and that includes Haryana, no army could have prevented it.
No.
But Gandhi stood between this disaster and us.
You once said at a lecture that Gandhi's killing was also received with tears and anguish in Pakistan.
Yes, I read it at that time.
You made a very interesting point when you said that the word nationalist should never be attached to Hindu nationalists that they would like to claim themselves to be.
RSS and Hindu Mahasabha.
That's right.
I would not deny it to the Bengal revolutionaries.
Correct. So, I mean, what then should they be called?
They are communalists, they should be called communalists. And I think one should remember that in 1909, Gandhiji in his Hind Swaraj criticizes those Hindu leaders who have opposed concessions to Muslims in the Indian Councils Act of 1909. So, you were asking me about enmity to Gandhiji, but that controversy goes back to 1909. I mean, there also he says that if any concessions are given to Muslims, they are our brothers, why are you objecting?
In fact, the book I edited on Gandhi's assassination, I have tried to say that there were, not tried to say, I have said that there were 5 attempts on Gandhi's life, first one being 1934, and had nothing to do with any fast or any demand for Pakistan. It was much more closely to do with the kind of demands coming out of the National Congress, which were more socialist, more people driven, people's rights driven, and very closely connected to his increasing articulations on a non-religious basis of nationhood, which is something which
actually that statement assertion he made in Hind Swaraj also.
You have commented on the fact that when your father, also a professor in this university, made this address in Bombay, addressing the working session of the Indian National Congress, made a very Indian History Congress. So what was that what was that address that he made?
He had prepared this address immediately after independence and in midst of the partition massacres. And so the first point he made was, being the first session after independence, that although partition was a great disaster, it was a great achievement of the Congress High Command, particularly Mahatma Gandhi, that India decided to remain a secular state. I was interested in this use of the word secular, because it is often heard that secular is a later indication, but then I find that Pandit Nehru had used the word secular even in his autobiography.
Yes.
So that was the first point he made. The second point he made was that that communalism has grown because earlier we had culture groups, that was the term he coined, which had adjusted themselves to each other. But under colonial rule, these have turned into all India communities with political coloring, and it was this that he condemned. He thought that they are turning into, in fact, political communities should have been resisted. And this is, of course, a criticism of the Hindu Mahasabha and the Muslim League.
That's right.
The third point he was making, because he had come under Marxist influence by that time, that he thought that the poor people should be brought into history. These were the major 3 points. It must be remembered that throughout 40s, in fact, before that entire period, he was a total supporter of the Congress, never wavering in his support.
Do you think the points that he made then are relevant today?
Well, I think all the 3 points seem relevant. One would not make them exactly in the way he did, because despite the massacres in Punjab, RSS and Hindu Mahasabha were not political forces in the rest of India. Today, the RSS is governing India, so the context has changed.
What is so dangerous about today with the RSS governing India?
Of course, the people who are affected, say the Muslims, to some also Dalits, other minorities, Christian tribals for instance, they are directly affected. It seems almost that mob violence is being not only encouraged, but almost being expected by the central government, the way ministers respond to it. So, that is one issue. But the second and larger issue is what about the country? And it is that which is even more worrying. Because if somebody in some other country, its prime minister had said, for instance, that Bulgaria knew about plastic surgery in remote times when the Slavic gods were worshipped, what would one have thought? Somebody who should go to an asylum, but an Indian prime minister makes it, and for a long time, except for the Indian History Congress, everybody is silent. The Science Congress is silent, and then everyone else begins saying these things. It is so, it's very encouraging and it's very comforting that now I believe even 500 scientists have signed.
I was just coming to
and
that,
some of them are perhaps government servants, many of them government servants. So, they are also feeling that the wind is turning against them, turning against science, turning against reason, turning against secularism. And behind all this is the total surrender to the corporate sector. Like saying that all scientific research in CSIR should be financed by companies, that is to say, they are to become research and development wings of private companies. So, behind all this is the triumph of the corporate sector and a total rejection of the welfare state ideal, which is also shown by their withdrawal of funds from the social sector.
Manrega,
everything they are.
Rural Works program.
Even there is a school for the deaf here in
Aligarh.
Aligarh, and they have only received half the grant of the last year up till now. How are they going to pay their teachers? So, there is almost total indifference to that.
The last 6 weeks have seen this burgeoning protest. It began with writers, then there were historians, now there are 500 scientists. How significant do you see these? Because this is the cultural heart of India speaking, this is the scientific elite of India speaking, elite in terms of the intellectual elite, and where do you see it going, sir?
You see, it had to come, and I am glad it came. One must remember that RSS and Hindu Mahasabha, but RSS mostly now, RSS now in Hindu Vish Parishad and all its sister organizations or front organizations, they present a picture of an ideology that is revolting to any ordinary person of common sense who has gone through the ordinary education mill. It is all right when they appeal to the upper caste, But when they are all saying this about plastic surgery, about everyone knowing everything in the past, about justifying mob violence, then they are practically rejecting the whole modern view, not only the secular view, the modern view of life, the rational view of life. And the only practical purpose seems to be to strengthen the corporate sector, and they are quite open about it. So their entire ideology, in fact, works to justify that particular orientation of the regime. Now, I don't say that the previous Congress regime did not also support the public sector, but they did not support it totally in that crude way, an open way in which the present government in the name of development is doing.
So, coming back to the study of history and medieval India, what is it about the medieval period that is so irksome to Hindutva ideologues? Why do they constantly need to revile it in the popular imagination, in their speeches, in the attempted history rewriting? What is it about the medieval Indian period that is so problematic for them?
Well, I feel that partly the reason during the national movement was political. It was difficult to be Deshbhakt, as they call themselves now, when the British Raj was there. But it was easier to be a Hindu or a Muslim, communalist. And therefore, you make Muslims your enemy and collect all the kind of material that you have. And then also the caste system. Now, I will for instance give an example. There are many theories of the origin of the Rajputs. I am not going into them. But the Rajputs are seen as resisting the Muslims.
Yeah.
But they are not descendants of the old Kshatriyas. So, where did they come from? So, Dashath Sharma gave an explanation. They are actually Brahmans who, seeing that Kshatriyas has failed to stem Muslims, now took arms and therefore became Rajputs. Now, this is the now the RSS version. Now, why not a Shudra and a Vaishya? Why he should not take arms and become a Rajput? No, only a higher caste can become a Rajput. You can see in this explanation the working of the caste system. So, the caste system is there, and then of course, how did the lower caste come? Because the Muslims oppressed those who had resisted them. Now, the RSS had been saying it for some time, Bhagwat had said it, and now it was repeated a few days ago by a BJP official. And therefore, the scheduled castes or the Dalits have arisen. In other words, to place everything bad during the medieval period. We forgot all our science because we were suppressed in the medieval period, otherwise we would have practically a modern revolution. In fact, many others directly or indirectly support the view. For instance, Ramvilas Sharma unfortunately also supported this view. So, this is and the Ayodhya judgment,
Yeah.
Agarwal's judgment says Muslim rulers or foreigners who sent wealth abroad. Well, where is the example of their sending wealth abroad? I mean, they were not like British who ruled from London, they did not rule from Kabul or Samarkand. So, whether Rajas or Badshahs, they all looted, but the loot was in the country. So, this is the kind of ideas that they develop and they justify. You can see it in their textbook for medieval India, in which, for example, the fact that Bahmani kings, many of them were murdered, is highlighted, whereas the fact that at every Vijayanagar emperor's death, some 300 to 500 women were forcibly burnt, is not even mentioned. So, this is the kind of history, one-sided history they are projecting.
Coming back to medieval India and your entire study of the agrarian system under the Mughals. So, can you tell us a little bit about what India was like as a historian in that period? And obviously there was a big India, so you have what is north and northwest, even beyond India's borders today. You have east, you have west, and you have the south.
Well, of course, we should recognize that these that states at that time and societies at that time, not welfare states or egalitarian societies, they were exploitative states which took
Feudal.
a large amount of tax
Feudal, yeah.
from the peasants, and then there were intermediary classes like zamindars who also took their shares. This was throughout the world. India
exactly.
is not an exception. There was a writer Bhim Sen who, going to South India, made a great discovery, and that discovery was very interesting because Karl Marx would have been greatly interested in it. He thought that the better the climate, the greater the fertility of land, the greater the poverty.
Greater the
Poverty, because one could live in a very small amount. And so, the great temples of South India, he said, were built because the surplus produced was such a large amount. This is Bhim Sen, an official of the Mughal government, who went with the Mughal armies to South India. So, this is one thing. This is true of the Mughal Empire also. Of course, the fertility might not have been as much as in part of South India, but the whole of India and Bengal particularly was fertile. So, the surplus was quite large. But at the same time, there are things to be said for its culture, and for despite communal violence at various occasions, and also some communal discrimination which existed, there was a lot of coexistence and the development of composite culture. And when foreigners came here, they did not see Muslims oppressing Hindus. They were generally surprised at the religious multiplicity without any trouble in India, how everyone had adjusted itself. Even in Aurangzeb's time, foreigners thought that in India every religion was tolerated. So, that is particularly a tradition we should remember. And there were, what I have found more interesting was how, particularly in the Mughal period, explanations were sought for this coexistence, like the statement that since God does not discriminate between Hindus and Muslims when the sun shines or the rain falls, then why the king as his representative should distinguish. This is even mentioned for his own purposes by Aurangzeb.
Okay.
But this is an official doctrine from the time of Akbar. The other one in Akbar, that since the world is an illusion, religion is also an illusion, and so you should tolerate everything, but you should particularly support reason. And that argument of Abul Fazl, I think, although developed out of a Sufic idea of the world as illusion, Ibn Arabi, but that introduction of reason as a thing which must be supported, although that too is supposedly illusion. I think all these are interesting and important intellectual attempts to explain the situation on the ground.
You know, you mentioned the interesting experiments and the reality of coexistence, and I particularly am keen to ask you two questions. First is to do with the era of Aurangzeb from the perspective of the state I come from, which is Maharashtra, and one of the very aggressive communalist efforts, particularly over the last century, to communalize Shivaji. And in fact, I am sure you already know, sir, but the leaders of the trade union movement, even before Govind Pansare wrote that wonderful book which has been now reproduced, Shivaji Kaun Hota, who was Shivaji.
Now it's been translated into English.
That's right. But even before he did that, there was Comrade Dange who gave this speech on the Azad Hind Mills compound in the 40s. And it's part of his 12 great speeches of Dange, where he says in Marathi, Shivaji Tyanche and Shivaji Amche, which is their Shivaji and our Shivaji. And he actually elaborates that, Shivaji might have had certain taxation and, feudal exploitation issues vis-a-vis Aurangzeb. But the dispute was not religious. And in fact, the 3 letters that Shivaji wrote to Aurangzeb, one of which I annexed to Pansare's book, are written with great respect, invoking even Islam as a tradition and a religion, and basically saying, please, but just cut your taxes. It's getting to be exploitative for us. And it's only when he felt he was not being listened to that he revolted and broke away and formed his smaller federation of small rulers. So I just wanted to ask you that it's Shivaji in Maharashtra, it's Aurangzeb at the national level. It's just trying to use this all in the 19th century in the lead up to the independence movement. It's Jai Somnath, it's by K.M. Munshi, the book written suddenly which sells 20 editions. So the whole effort seems to be within the nationalist movement to try and create sectarian identities which are at war with each other, even more aggressively than possibly under the British, I don't know.
Well, of course, you know that in the Shivaji cult is a 19th century development, as you have said. The Peshwas were never great admirers, apparently, of Shivaji.
Never.
And there was this Maratha versus Brahman controversy over it. In the Balaji Bajirao is said to be the originator of Hindu Padpashahi, you see, but the Peshwa. When people mention it, they forget that he had a Muslim wife by whom he had a Muslim son.
Oh, I see.
Yes. And he was apparently, I am not sure about it, but playing with the idea of him succeeded, but he withdrew back. And apparently he was given a big Jagir in Bundelkhand, where his descendants continued for some time. So this was the kind of life they had at that time. Like saying in Persian and Urdu poetry, you go to the prayers in the masjid and then go to the mekhana, that is to say the wine shop. So that's it, the double life they led, and they were quite comfortable with it. I think it could be said of the Shivaji at the same time that when he would be praised for protecting the Brahman and the cow, as any Muslim ruler would be praised for his support of the deen without it meaning anything.
Yeah.
Now to modern eyes, they are a reality. Hindu Padpashahi is a reality also. Although when you look at the Peshwa, this is his whole outlook. But today, therefore, if you go by words, they probably can build up an equal case for Shivaji as a Hindu ruler and Aurangzeb as a Muslim ruler. But actually the case is that during the period that the struggle with Aurangzeb took place, Shivaji's struggle, Aurangzeb's religious policy had not been developed to its greatest extent. Yeah. Jizya came in 1679, just 1 year before Shivaji's death. And a very interesting letter of Shivaji, which is not genuine, which was not actually written by Shivaji,
okay,
but was written in the name of Shivaji and circulated among Mughal nobility, because it is found not in Maratha, Maharashtra, but in manuscripts of Mughal officials, Muslim Mughal officials.
I didn't know that.
Yes, this is a Khat-e Shivaji, in which he says that Jizya was abolished by Akbar and you should not reimpose it. And then you have exempted the Rajputs. So this is unjust, that other Hindus should have. Now, you know, this is this is not Shivaji speaking, but it is interesting that a letter attributed to Shivaji
Yes.
in the last year of his life is circulating among Mughal officials, Muslim Mughal officials, in Aurangzeb's own time. The letter I am quoting is from Izzat Bakhsh Rasa, an official of the Mughal, but other manuscripts also exist of this letter. But we must remember that a delegation of Mughal nobles with Jahan Ara pleaded with Aurangzeb to withdraw the order.
To withdraw the order on
withdraw
Jazia.
the order of Jan Jazia.
Who were these generals?
Well, the nobles' names are not given, but Jahan Ara is said to have been involved in the assembly. That was her. She was very old. She was older than Aurangzeb. Would die soon after, but she was alive at that time.
Coming back to the again the medieval period and even ancient period, but where you have the travelers in history. You have the chroniclers and travelers who travel to different lands and write about history. So you have Setang, you have Al-Baruni. How important is it to look at history through their study of their work?
Well, I think it's very important because often our own writers don't describe things which they think are common, usual, routine, as you say. Whereas to foreigners, those things look strange, and so they describe them. That is one reason why these accounts are important. The second reason, unfortunately, is that before the medieval period, neither history nor geography were very important elements in Sanskrit literature. Even where geography is present in describing parts and so on, it's the accounts of even India are very brief, and there are no accounts of other countries, no except that in early accounts there was Yavanapura, prime meridian, but there is no real description of geography of other countries. Even when Indians went to China, they didn't leave any Sanskrit or Prakrit accounts of China. So, and our own geography descriptions, geographical descriptions are very brief, even where they exist in Sanskrit. So, foreigners supplement us there, Fayan and Yuanchang and Yiching add immensely to our geography. And then there is a Korean traveler who came in the 8th century. They add immensely to our information about regions, about their customs and so forth. And that is true of Al-Biruni. Of course, Al-Biruni is different because although he describes India as he could get it from Sanskrit sources. He is important, of course, that he gives us a bird's eye view of what Indian science was in the 11th century. So, and as Panekar said, it was a moment not only in Indian history, but in world history, when a major representative of a civilization looked at another civilization in such depth. There is no other parallel in world history.
One of the most interesting passages of Al-Biruni relates to the city of Banaras, where he also deals with the traditions there. And Banaras is such an interesting and fascinating place, both culturally and otherwise. So how far back does the narrative of Banaras go?
Well, you know that inscriptions are never romantic. But and of course there is an earlier history of Banaras because it was the, but Kosam, it was one of the Mahajanpadas, if I remember right, Kashi, in the 16 Janpadas. But there was an artist from Varanasi, that is the Ashokan Prakrit for Varanasi, who went to quite deep in Central Asia, at India, Ramgarh Hills, and there in a cave he painted, and he fell in love with a Devdasi and has left a romantic inscription there, I love you and the name of Devdasi. I think is the earliest romantic inscription in India, And whatever be the dharmic importance of Varanasi, it almost looks to me that the romantic importance is also there. It was an artist of Varanasi. And it's the first epigraphic mention of a Devdasi too.
So you have done so much work on cartography, in the sense of, I mean, as a teacher, I guess the history teacher can't really teach history without a map or a globe. To really make sense even to the primary school student, you need to have a good globe or a map to be able to really give sense and life to the history. So the department's Medieval India atlas, which Atharalis have, I think, produced, and then your atlas of ancient India, which came out in 2012. What does this dimension of study give to the study of history, cartography?
Well, actually, history needs a lot of referencing. Cartography is essentially a work of reference. You want to know where this place is located and what are the environs. When you are looking at an inscription, for instance, the inscription that I mentioned. By the way, I made a mistake. I would not say that Phal is Phar. It would the other way around. Phar would be Phal in Prakrit. But let us come back to that inscription. When you so where the Ramgarh hills are, actually they are much deeper in the hills. Then you begin to you can only appreciate it when you see it in the map and see how far it is from Varanasi, and why in the caves there should be people when it is now today totally desolate. So, cartography makes us, or maps make us think of these things. Then of course, there are other matters like boundaries, not only political boundaries, but boundaries of currency systems. You map from the you map the coin hoards and see whose rulers' maps were there, and you can also see which language was prevailing where if you map the inscriptions. So, totally new aspects of history appear. For instance, I am told, because my study of all the prehistoric studies are not very deep. We were making maps, I and my son, on the basis of secondary material reports, archaeological reports, and so on. You see, microliths are a very important development. At the time we made the map first, in Sri Lanka microliths go back to 34,000 years. And in North India they are very late. And then when in South India microliths have been found of equal rate, and Sri Lanka they are still in South India, in Andhra. But in Central and North India they are not there. So, this particular point that South India and Sri Lanka had a Mesolithic which did not spread to North India till much later. You know, we always think of movements from north to south, we do not think of movements from south to north. It came when we made our map. Others might have noticed it earlier, but at least one reviewer said that he got it from our map.
This map, yeah. That brings me to a connected question, because one of the communalist discourse vis-a-vis Hindutva and the current kind of majoritarian regime that we have, which is fascist, is constantly to wrongly interpret the way faiths traveled, the way belief systems traveled, with how they merged, how they cohesed, how they transformed. And one of the things, I mean, as a teacher just in primary, I keep on mentioning is that, you know, it's the history of trade and business that will tell you how faith systems and belief systems also travel. And if you look at the map of Asia and you look at India somewhere and you look at a small ocean in between and you look at West Asia, then that is really the first waterway that was constantly, the entire western coast, right from, you know, Karachi right down to Kerala, was where you had a lot of intermingling between us, our shores and the West Asian shores. But that sort of history is not taught in our textbooks. That sort of approach to history is not taught, Because if we were taught that, then we would know that our belief systems also went to Southeast Asia the same way as we received belief systems from different places.
Well, actually, the theory of Greater India was therefore developed. So, sometimes it is also dangerous. And R.C. Majumdar's very important book was first titled Indian Colonies in Southeast in the Far East, because we thought that every civilization should have colonies. But when after independence colonialism became a bad word, it should have become a bad word earlier. R.C. Majumdar's book was titled differently. I think Indian culture in Southeast Asia or something like that. I forget the title, but the colonies word was out. And of course, Western China and into China, that kind of study has now greatly developed because of excavations. But Afghanistan, recent happenings in Afghanistan have been a disaster. Ever since the fall of the communist regime, the antiquities have been destroyed, and the same is happening in Syria. But so much of our heritage will be destroyed because many things, antiquities removed from their original sites, lose their value.
Yeah.
Anyway, but several inscriptions have also come to light. There is another thing about religions we should learn, that religious beliefs transfer to each other. Many beliefs of Muslims, Christians and Jews come from Zoroastrianism. Many, surprisingly large number. God and devil particularly is purely Zoroastrian. Angels are Zoroastrian. The narrow bridge to paradise is Zoroastrian. The day of judgment is Zoroastrian. And so also, but when do we come to the relations, if you follow the NDA textbook on ancient India, then it was emphasized that Buddhism and Jainism are offshoots of Upanishads. Actually, it is not very clear that the transfer is not in the reverse direction, and I will suggest you why, despite the fact that almost every historian has said that Upanishads have the transmigration of souls, but the Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, in which this occurs along with Brihadaranyaka, it says that this was a Kshatriya doctrine, concealed among the Kshatriyas, very long, and then it was revealed. Now, it means that Upanishads are saying it is not from the Brahman tradition at all. And then you see that both Gautama Buddha and Mahavira are Kshatriyas.
Yeah.
And then you see that actually there is no absolute dating of the Upanishads, because Sanskrit cannot be related to Prakrit. And therefore, Upanishads might be these two Upanishads might be post-Buddhist. It is only Macmillan, it is only that famous German writer, Max Muller, sorry, I forget now because of my old age. Max Muller, who had said that they are pre-Buddhist, but there is no proof, and I think Kosambi suggested somewhere that they could be later. And if they are later, then the transference has been totally from Buddhism and Jainism. Then if you look at transmigration of souls, it enters Dharma Shastra very much later. And then it becomes a justification for the caste system in Brahmanical writing.
Tara Chand's 1928 book, Influence of Islam on Indian Culture, again a very important book which we seem to have lost somewhere. Raj Mohan Roy's work, Raja Ram Mohan Roy's work. I mean, so much stuff that needs to be brought back to the young person's classroom. What would you today advise for the revitalization of history in the face of this fascist onslaught? Because
well, actually, Bipan Chandra reprinted Tara Chand's Influence of Islam on Indian Culture.
But from National Book Trust?
National Book Trust, if I remember right. I have its second edition, which Tara Chand in his lifetime brought out. A remarkable man. He, I think, overemphasized the Islamic influence. I don't think Shankaracharya at that level could have been influenced by monotheism, by Islam. and pantheism had not developed in Islam by that time. But despite that, the interconnection between Islam and Hinduism is well brought out.
Yeah. What should be done to revitalize history teaching in the face of this fascist onslaught? How can we use technology, different methods of transferring not just information but imagery, because they seem to have a lot of resources with them, and I talk about the RSS fold, which is now of course in power in government, so it has government finance also behind it. So what should be done by citizens, by groups, by historians, by intellectuals?
Yes, it's a hard task, because you can now forge very easily also. You know, the Rajaram's forgery of the horse, which, as Rumila Thapar correctly pointed out, could only have been discovered in the United States, because they had the sufficient technology to check with every blessed seal. We don't have that. And they realized that this is a forgery, no such seal, the seal that exists does not have the horse on it. Otherwise, it would not have been found out, and the forgery would have been intended. So, clearly
this is to show Harappan civilization and Aryan connection.
Yes, I mean, it's a silly thing, because actually it is very difficult to distinguish a wild ass from a horse. And up till the 14th century, Punjab was full of wild horses. It was the rifles of the 19th century that actually destroyed the whole, because their meat was relished. I don't know, horse meat I wouldn't be attracted by, but apparently it attracted huntsmen. So they were destroyed. So Indus civilization had really these wild asses.
Oh, I see.
And it's very difficult for one to distinguish between them and horses.
You know, Irfan sir, we've had a fascinating conversation. Just in very brief, if you can tell the young viewer, what is this obsession with trying to date the Veda, date the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which the ICHR, which you once headed, is now trying to do, the YSR Rao is trying to do, and this obsession with Saraswati. Why is it so important to this communalist project?
For an Indian, if he is a nationalist, it is enough that Indus civilization was in the Indian continent in pre-47 India. It should be enough. But for a Hindu communalist, and you can identify him, it is not enough. Dravidians should not go to Indus civilization. Why not? Dravidians are Indians. If they claim Indus civilization,
let them.
How do you feel insulted? And I think the only indications, such as whatever the indications, they are few, but the 2 or 3 indications are towards a Dravidian origin. It should not be. But now it is very necessary to prove that Indus civilization was Hindu. So it must be made Saraswati's Hindu civilization. And then you must date Vedas earlier than the Indus civilization.
Yeah.
Now it has been pointed out that it is silly. Indus civilization is written civilization. Vedas don't know writing. Upanishads don't know writing, they never mention writing. Jatakas don't mean writing, and you can't say Jatakas are 5000 BC. It is Ashoka from whose time, and Panini is the first, who is dated around 350 BC, who mentions Lipi.
Mentions?
Lipi.
Lipi.
But
Script.
that is also very late, and it could be an insertion also. So, all these things are there, and then you are saying that the Indus civilization is Aryan. Then the Vedic gods are all half human or human, they are so portrayed. Even in Indian iconography, they are all human and description. Whereas the Indus gods are zoomorphic. In Indus culture, water is important, whereas in the Vedic religion, fire, Agni. So, there is all this difference, and then you come to dating. Apart from the linguistic things that the Vedic Sanskrit can't be so old, there can't be 3,000 years between it and Avesta, which is so close. Apart from that, the fact that the Rig Veda has chariots, horse-driven chariots, makes it impossible that it was before 2000 BC. I mean, before 2000 BC, archaeology has nowhere found horse-driven chariots, drawn chariots. But they are insisting. In the NDA textbooks also, Rig Veda was placed along with the Indus civilization, and Indus civilization was dated to 5000 BC. I don't know for what purpose, because obviously that's a false dating. But they wanted to put it as early as the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian civilizations. That's our misfortune, that we are later.
2500 not.
But we should learn from Chinese. If we are competing with them, they have never claimed for their civilization a date earlier than 2000 BC. They are satisfied 2000 BC is early.
It's been a fascinating conversation, sir. One last thing, if you feel like telling us politically, where should we go now? We are at such a difficult point, what you said yesterday. What do we do? I mean, where should we go?
Well, as a citizen, I feel that all secular forces should combine, and if we have some differences about electoral alliances, while we settle them, we should at least combine in all other platforms. We should be able to speak at each other's gatherings. We should be able to have even platforms, united platforms, where we should oppose communalism and semi-fascism, which is now coming, because if you look at both Italy, where fascism came creeping over 10 years, and in Nazi Germany, where it came faster, the first thing was to use hooliganism, not police.
Correct.
Hooliganism was there, and divisive politics was their initial method, and that's what's happening, I think.
So, unity of all forces against the RSS, huh?
Yes, the whatever, under whatever name they call RSS, and of course that's the main body, but Vishwendu Parishad and all these Hindu Sena, Shiv Sena, whatever, so far as they are supporting this, they are competing with each other sometimes, but when they are in the same field, we should unitedly oppose them, and we should build platforms. As I say, if electoral unity is not possible, there are other platforms we should build, where we should all come together. Even when we have differences otherwise, in state politics, in central politics we may have differences, but we should come together.
I'm really very, very grateful for this conversation, sir. It will be fascinating to put together for the young viewer. Thank you very, very much.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you.